The moment they called me a liar in front of everyone, I almost smiled. My name's Megan Calloway, and I was standing in the middle of a hospital hallway in a paper, thin gown that kept sliding off my left shoulder. My ivy line trailing behind me like some grotesque leash, when Daniel's mother looked me dead in the eye and said the words I will never. Not once in the rest of my life, forget. You faked it, Eleanor said. All of it. She didn't whisper it. She didn't pull me aside. Didn't wait for a nurse to pass. Didn't lower her voice for anyone. She said it the way people announce a verdict, loud, final. And meant to be witnessed. 3 nurses froze at the station. A doctor with a clipboard stopped walking. 2 orderlies by the supply cart turned their heads, and Daniel, my Daniel. The man who had held my hand at the altar 6 years ago and promised me in front of God and 73 guests that he would be there. Always. Daniel stood just behind his mother's right shoulder, and he said absolute nothing. I felt the cold linoleum through the thin soles of my hospital socks. I felt the ivy needle shift slightly in the back of my hand. I felt somewhere beneath the bruising and the cracked rib and the concussion that still made the fluorescent lights pulse like a migraine. I felt something harden in my chest. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something that, if Eleanor had been paying closer attention, she would have recognized as dangerous. Instead, she kept going. You were conscious, she said. Her voice didn't waver. She had rehearsed this. You woke up in that room and you chose not to tell anyone. You laid there and you listened, like a rat in the walls. And now you want to use what you heard to threaten this family. She took 1 step closer. She smelled like her expensive perfume, Chanel No. 5. Always, the smell I had associated with Christmas dinners and passes of aggressive compliments about my cooking for 6 years. But here's what you don't understand, Megan. No one will believe you. You're a woman who just survived a car crash. You're fragile, unstable. The doctors already have notes about your emotional state. She let that land. She watched my face for the crack, and I almost gave it to her. My eyes burned. My throat closed the way it always does right before the tears come, and I can't stop them. The way it has always happened to me at the worst possible moments, my entire life, as if my body decided long ago to betray me on a schedule. I felt the sting climbing up behind my eyes, but then I thought about what was in my phone, still locked, still hidden. Tucked into the waistband of my hospital gown, against my hip bone, where I'd pressed it the moment I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. The phone, they'd all assumed, was dead because I'd told the nurses the screen was cracked, and it wouldn't turn on. And none of them had thought to check, because why would they? Because I was the patient. I was the one who'd almost died. I was the one with the busted clavicle and the laceration above my eyebrow that had taken 11 stitches to close. I was the one no one was watching carefully enough. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. Eleanor, I said. And my voice came out quieter than he meant it to, barely above a whisper, and somehow that was worse. Somehow the quiet of it made 2 of the nurses take a small, unconscious step back from the station. Because quiet is the kind of thing people feel in their sternum before they understand why. I don't need anyone to believe me. She blinked. The first fracture in her composure. Because believing me, he said, is no longer the point. I watched Daniel's jaw tighten. He watched Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand curl slow at her side, and then a nurse appeared at my elbow, young, red-haired. The one who'd checked my vitals twice overnight and called me honey in a way that made me want to cry into her shoulder, and she said, "Ms. Calloway, you really should be resting. Can I walk you back to your room?" And I let her take my arm. I let her start to guide me away. Because there was nothing more to say in that hallway. Not yet. Not with the 3 of them standing there, arranging their faces back into certainty. I let them think they'd won the moment. As we turned the corner, I pressed my palm flat against my hip. Felt the rectangle of my phone hard and real beneath the thin fabric. Everything they'd said in my room. In that room they thought I was unconscious in. In that room where they had stood at the foot of my bed and spoken freely and destroyed every story I had ever told myself about my marriage. All of it was still there. Saved, backed up. Sent, but to understand why any of this matters, why Eleanor Hargrove felt entitled to call me a liar in a hospital corridor. Why Daniel said nothing. Why there was something worth hiding badly enough to say it over the body of a woman they thought couldn't hear them. You have to go back. You have to go back to the night of the crash. You have to go back to the moment the ICU room went quiet and I realized. With my eyes still closed and the morphine still heavy and warm in my bloodstream, that the voices I was hearing were not the voices of people who had come to pray for my survival. You have to go back to the beginning of how I got here, flat on my back, broken in 4 places. Wearing a gown in a building that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. With a secret pressed against my hip bone and a family arranged against me like a courthouse, to understand the single decision that changed every calculation. I kept my eyes closed. That was it! That was the whole thing. I survived the crash. I woke up, and I chose not to tell anyone. And in the space between those closed eyes and those open ears, I heard enough to bring down everything. The Calloway name. The Hargrove money behind it. The arrangement they called a marriage, and I called my life. All of it. But you need to understand who I was before that hospital room. Before the ice road and the guardrail and the sound of metal folding like paper. Before I became the woman standing in a hallway in a paper gown with a secret no one knew she was keeping. You need to understand who Megan Calloway was before, because the woman I was would never have kept her eyes closed. The woman I was would have opened them immediately, reached for Daniel's hand, and believed, genuinely believed, in the goodness of the people standing around her. That woman died somewhere on Route 9 between the on-ramp and the guardrail. What woke up in that hospital bed was something else. Something quieter, something that had finally, after 34 years of trusting the wrong rooms and the wrong people in them, decided to listen before speaking. And what I heard in that room, in those hours I lay still with the machines beeping and the fluorescent light burning orange through my closed eyelids and the voices of people I loved arranging my future without me, is still the most devastating thing I have ever survived. More than the crash, more than the cold. More than the 11 stitches and the shattered clavicle, and the 2 days I spent breathing through a machine. What I heard was the wreckage underneath the wreckage, the thing that had always been there. I just hadn't been still enough to hear it. Until now. And what I'm holding, what I held against my skin in that hallway while Eleanor called me a liar and Daniel looked at his shoes, is the kind of evidence that doesn't ask to be believed. It simply ends things, but we're not there yet. To get there, I have to take you back to the night everything started, the rain on Route 9. The headlights, the moment before impact when I had exactly one thought. One clear and terrible and almost peaceful thought. And then forward again through the dark, through the beeping. Through the voices I wasn't supposed to hear. It starts in the ICU, 2 days before that hallway. It starts with me deciding to keep my eyes shut. The Monday it happened, I wore the gray blazer. I want to say that because it matters to me now in the way small things always matter after they become part of a story you didn't know you were living. The gray blazer with the small pearl buttons that my mother, Linda, had sent me for my birthday 2 years ago in a flat box with tissue paper she'd pressed herself. She always pressed the tissue paper. Even though it was just tissue paper, even though I'd told her she didn't need to. He wore that blazer because it was a Monday, and Mondays were the days the partners held their standing review. And 6 years had taught me that looking put together on Mondays was one of the quiet ways I kept mice visible, kept mice in the room. He had been asked to present that morning, not asked exactly. Greg had sent an email the previous Thursday at 4:52, 8 minutes before end of business, with the subject line, Monday stand-up, prep attached. The attachment was 11 slides. 7 of them were mine. The other 4 were his reformatted versions of mine, with his name in the footer, and the color scheme adjusted to the one he preferred, which was slight more blue and slightly less readable. He had written in the body of the email, "Thought we'd loop you in to walk through the Calloway account restructure since you've been working closely on this one. Loop me in. Walk through." Working closely. 6 months of 60-hour weeks described as working closely. As though I'd been standing nearby while someone more important did the actual lifting. But he had said yes. Of course I had said yes. I had pressed my gray blazer, and I had prepared talking points, and I had arrived at 7:15 to set up the conference room, because the AV system on the 3rd floor was unreliable, and I had learned not to trust it. There were 11 people in that room by 8 o'clock. Greg, 3 partners, including a man named Warren Ashby who had approved my cost of living adjustment with a signature I doubted he remembered making. 2 junior analysts who were there to learn, they said, which meant they were there to watch and remember. Brandon Walsh in the corner seat, with his name on a placard outside his office and his parking spot and his $96,000 a year. Scrolling his phone until the meeting started, and Eleanor Hargrove, Calloway herself, who almost never came to standing reviews and whose presence that morning I had taken, stupidly, as a sign. I had thought, I am ashamed of this now, I had thought she was there because of the work. Because word had gotten to her about the restructuring proposal and what it had done for retention numbers in the Calloway portfolio. I had thought maybe this was the moment, 6 years, and maybe this was the moment the room finally looked up. I got through 4 slides before Warren Ashby put his hand flat on the table, not a dramatic gesture, not even a loud one, just a hand. Placed down, and the room going quiet around it, he said, "Megan, let's pause there," and something in the way he said it, the flatness of it, the prepared quality of it, like a line he'd rehearsed, made the back of my neck go cold. He looked at Greg first. Greg was looking at the table. That was when I knew. Warren said, "We've been doing some restructuring of our own, internally. As of today, the Calloway account is moving under Brandon's oversight." I heard the words. I understood them individually. Restructuring, moving, oversight. "Brandon," he said, "I'm sorry." Not because I hadn't heard, because I was giving him the chance to mean something different. To say something that would rearrange the words into a shape that made sense. He didn't. He said the project would transition immediately. He said my role was being evaluated as part of a broader organizational realignment. He said they valued my contributions. He said contributions with the particular smoothness of someone who has been coached by an HR department on which words to use, and that someone would be in touch by end of week about next steps. Next steps. I was still standing at the front of the room. The slides were still on the screen behind me. Slide 5 was a graph I had built from raw data I had manually compiled over 3 weekends. And my name was in the bottom right corner in a font size so small it was practically a secret, but it was there. I had made sure it was there. And now the meeting was over, and people were standing up and gathering their things, and no one was looking at me. Not Greg. Not Warren. Not Eleanor, who I saw glance at her phone, and then at the window, and then at somewhere in the middle distance that wasn't me. Brandon Walsh looked up from his own phone, long enough to give me something that might have been a sympathetic expression, or might have been the face people make when they want to appear sympathetic without committing to actually feeling it. He said, "Hey," for what it's worth. And then he seemed to decide that whatever it was worth wasn't quite enough to finish the sentence, and he left. I stood at the front of that conference room for what felt like a very long time. It was probably 40 seconds. I gathered my notes. I clicked off the projector. I did this carefully, methodically, because the alternative was to stop moving. And if I stopped moving, I was afraid of what would happen in my body, in my face. In the 11 years of accumulated restraint that had been holding everything in a shape other people could look at without discomfort. I walked out of the conference room and down the hall and past Greg's office. His doors was closed, and past Brandon's corner office, his placard gleaming, and I pressed the elevator button, and I stood there in the hallway under the fluorescent lights, and I waited. The elevator took a long time. Long enough that I had to stand there being a person with a face while 2 junior analysts passed me in the hall. And one of them said something quiet to the other. And they both went very carefully neutral, in the way people go neutral when they've just seen something happen to someone, and they don't want to get any of it on them. I made it to the parking garage. I made it to my car, a 12-year, old Civic that I had kept meticulously maintained because reliable transportation felt like something I owed my own future self. And I sat in the driver's seat in the gray blazer with the pearl buttons, and I put my hands on the wheel, and I stared at the concrete wall in front of me. And I came apart, not loudly, not in the way you see in movies where grief announces itself and fills a room, quietly. In the way things come apart when they've been holding together through sheer will for 6 years, and the will finally runs out. I cried until my makeup was gone and my throat hurt, and there was nothing left of whatever composure the morning had asked of me. I thought about my mother Linda, on her feet for 12 hours, smiling through gritted teeth. I thought about the copy room and Brandon's offer letter and the 11 minutes in the bathroom stall. I thought about Rainmaker and Reliable One, and show's great potential and for what it's worth, and the sound of Warren Ashby's hand coming flat down on the table. I thought about Daniel, and how he would look at me from across the counter tonight, and what he would say, and that was its own kind of grief. The anticipatory kind. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough that the parking garage got quiet around me. Long enough that the morning shift of the coffee cart on the ground floor ended, and someone wheeled it back inside. I was reaching for my keys, not because he had anywhere to go, because sitting still had become unbearable, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. No area code I recognized. I almost didn't answer. I was in no condition to answer. My voice would have given everything away in the first syllable, but something made me pick up anyway. Some habit, maybe. Some 6-year-old muscle memory of never being the one who let things go to voicemail. He pressed the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end said 4 words, far words that I have not been able to stop hearing since. Lying in this hospital bed with the monitors marking my survival in little electronic pulses. With the questions I couldn't ask crowding up against my teeth like something trying to get out. 4 words that told me that what had happened this morning was not the end of something. It was the beginning. The Monday it happened, I wore the gray blazer. I want to say that because it matters to me now in the way small things always matter after they become part of a story you didn't know you were living. The gray blazer with the small pearl buttons that my mother Linda had sent me for my birthday 2 years ago in a flat box with tissue paper she'd pressed herself. She always pressed the tissue paper. Even though it was just tissue paper, even though I'd told her she didn't need to. He wore that blazer because it was a Monday, and Mondays were the days the partners held their standing review. And 6 years had taught me that looking put together on Mondays was one of the quiet ways I kept mice visible, kept mice in the room. He had been asked to present that morning, not asked exactly. Greg had sent an email the previous Thursday at 4:52, 8 minutes before end of business, with the subject line, Monday stand-up, prep attached. The attachment was 11 slides. 7 of them were mine. The other 4 were his reformatted versions of mine, with his name in the footer, and the color scheme adjusted to the one he preferred, which was slight more blue and slightly less readable. He had written in the body of the email, "Thought we'd loop you in to walk through the Callaway account restructure since you've been working closely on this one. Loop me in. Walk through." Working closely. 6 months of 60-hour weeks described as working closely. As though I'd been standing nearby while someone more important did the actual lifting. But he had said yes. Of course I had said yes. I had pressed my gray blazer, and I had prepared talking points, and I had arrived at 7:15 to set up the conference room because the AV system on the 3rd floor was unreliable, and I had learned not to trust it. There were 11 people in that room by 8 o'clock. Greg, 3 partners, including a man named Warren Ashby who had approved my cost of living adjustment with a signature I doubted he remembered making. 2 junior analysts who were there to learn, they said, which meant they were there to watch and remember. Brandon Walsh in the corner seat, with his name on a placard outside his office and his parking spot and his $96,000 a year. Scrolling his phone until the meeting started, and Eleanor Hargrove, Callaway herself, who almost never came to standing reviews and whose presence that morning I had taken, stupidly, as a sign. I had thought, I am ashamed of this now, I had thought she was there because of the work. Because word had gotten to her about the restructuring proposal and what it had done for retention numbers in the Callaway portfolio. I had thought maybe this was the moment, 6 years, and maybe this was the moment the room finally looked up. I got through 4 slides before Warren Ashby put his hand flat on the table, not a dramatic gesture, not even a loud one, just a hand. Placed down, and the room going quiet around it, he said, "Megan, let's pause there," and something in the way he said it, the flatness of it, the prepared quality of it, like a line he'd rehearsed, made the back of my neck go cold. He looked at Greg first, Greg was looking at the table. That was when I knew, Warren said. We've been doing some restructuring of our own, internally. As of today, the Calloway account is moving under Brandon's oversight. I heard the words. I understood them individually. Restructuring, moving, oversight. Brandon, he said, I'm sorry. Not because I hadn't heard, because I was giving him the chance to mean something different. To say something that would rearrange the words into a shape that made sense. He didn't. He said the project would transition immediately. He said my role was being evaluated as part of a broader organizational realignment. He said they valued my contributions. He said contributions with the particular smoothness of someone who has been coached by an HR department on which words to use, and that someone would be in touch by end of week about next steps. Next steps. I was still standing at the front of the room. The slides were still on the screen behind me. Slide 5 was a graph I had built from raw data I had manually compiled over 3 weekends. And my name was in the bottom right corner in a font size so small it was practically a secret, but it was there. I had made sure it was there. And now the meeting was over, and people were standing up and gathering their things, and no one was looking at me. Not Greg. Not Warren. Not Eleanor, who I saw glance at her phone, and then at the window, and then at somewhere in the middle distance that wasn't me. Brandon Walsh looked up from his own phone, long enough to give me something that might have been a sympathetic expression, or might have been the face people make when they want to appear sympathetic without committing to actually feeling it. He said, "Hey," for what it's worth. And then he seemed to decide that whatever it was worth wasn't quite enough to finish the sentence, and he left. I stood at the front of that conference room for what felt like a very long time. It was probably 40 seconds. I gathered my notes. I clicked off the projector. I did this carefully, methodically, because the alternative was to stop moving. And if I stopped moving, I was afraid of what would happen my body, in my face. In the 11 years of accumulated restraint that had been holding everything in a shape other people could look at without discomfort. I walked out of the conference room and down the hall and past Greg's office. His doors was closed, and past Brandon's corner office, his placard gleaming, and I pressed the elevator button, and I stood there in the hallway under the fluorescent lights, and I waited. The elevator took a long time, long enough that I had to stand there being a person with a face while 2 junior analysts passed me in the hall. And one of them said something quiet to the other. And they both went very carefully neutral, in the way people go neutral when they've just seen something happen to someone, and they don't want to get any of it on them. I made it to the parking garage. I made it to my car, a 12-year, old Civic that I had kept meticulously maintained because reliable transportation felt like something I owed my own future self. And I sat in the driver's seat in the gray blazer with the pearl buttons, and I put my hands on the wheel, and I stared at the concrete wall in front of me. And I came apart, not loudly, not in the way you see in movies where grief announces itself and fills a room, quietly. In the way things come apart when they've been holding together through sheer will for 6 years, and the will finally runs out. I cried until my makeup was gone, and my throat hurt, and there was nothing left of whatever composure the morning had asked of me. I thought about my mother Linda, on her feet for 12 hours, smiling through gritted teeth. I thought about the copy room, and Brandon's offer letter, and the 11 minutes in the bathroom stall. I thought about Rainmaker and Reliable One, and shows great potential and for what it's worth, and the sound of Warren Ashby's hand coming flat down on the table. I thought about Daniel, and how he would look at me from across the counter tonight, and what he would say, and that was its own kind of grief. The anticipatory kind. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough that the parking garage got quiet around me. Long enough that the morning shift of the coffee cart on the ground floor ended, and someone wheeled it back inside. I was reaching for my keys, not because he had anywhere to go, because sitting still had become unbearable, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. No area code I recognized. I almost didn't answer. I was in no condition to answer. My voice would have given everything away in the first syllable, but something made me pick up anyway. Some habit, maybe. Some 6-year-old muscle memory of never being the one who let things go to voicemail. He pressed the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end said 4 words, words that I have not been able to stop hearing since. Lying in this hospital bed with the monitors marking my survival in little electronic pulses. With the questions I couldn't ask crowding up against my teeth like something trying to get out. 4 words that told me that what had happened this morning was not the end of something. It was the beginning. The voice was a woman's low, careful. The kind of careful that comes from knowing someone might be listening on the other end of the line who wasn't supposed to be. She said, "Is this Megan Calloway, Reyes?" I almost correct her. "My name is Megan Reyes. Just Reyes. The Calloway was the company, not me." Never me. I had 6 years of proof of that now if I needed reminding, but something about the way she said it made me go still. The hyphen. The deliberateness of it. I said, "Who is this?" She said, "My name is Judith. I used to work in records." I need you to know that before I say anything else, because what I'm going to tell you is going to sound like I have a reason to lie. And I want you to understand that I don't. Not anymore. I was still sitting in the parking garage, the concrete well in front of me. The Civic's engine off, my reflection faint in the window glass, eyes swollen, mascara gone. Gray blazer with the pearl buttons that I had pressed the night before in a kitchen that felt very far away now. I said, "What records department?" She said, "Calloway and Associates. I was there for 9 years. He left 8 months ago." The parking garage felt smaller suddenly. I said, "How did you get this number?" "From your personnel file," she said. "I kept a copy when I left, of a number of things. That's why I'm calling." There are moments that reorganize the air in a room, in a car, in whatever space you're occupying when the thing happens. I had had one that morning, Warren Ashby's hand on the table, the prepared flatness of his voice. This was another one. He could feel the shape of it coming before she said another word. "Megan," Judith said. "They filed the restructuring paperwork in November. 4 months ago. Your name has been on the transition list since November 14th. The Calloway account was never going to stay with you. Brandon Walsh signed an internal agreement in December. The meeting this morning was a formality. They already knew." I said nothing. "There's more," she said. "And this part, I need you to be somewhere you can think clearly when I tell you this. Because it changes what the restructuring actually was. I was not somewhere you could think clearly. I was in a parking garage in a torn-open morning with nothing left of whatever I had been at 7:15. But I said, 'Tell me.' She took a breath. She said, 'The structuring memo has your signature on it, not Brandon's, yours. Someone accessed your digital credentials through the internal system and generated a proposal under your name recommending the transition of the Calloway account to senior oversight. The proposal cites performance concerns. It cites client relationship instability. It cites you, Megan, by name, as the source of what it calls strategic drift in the Calloway portfolio. They used your login. They built the case. And then they let you walk into that room this morning not knowing any of it existed." The phone felt very heavy against my ear. I said, I didn't write that. I know," she said. "I have the metadata." The document was created on a Tuesday night at 11:43 p.m. from an IP address registered to the building's administrative server. You were not in the building at 11:43 on a Tuesday night in November. Your badge records show you left at 6:12. I was going to be sick. I was very clearly going to be sick, and I pressed my free hand flat against the dashboard and breathed through it. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. "Why now? Why today of all days?" She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Because they did the same thing to me. Different documents, different account, different year. And I didn't have anyone call me. And want you to understand what you're actually dealing with before you sign anything they put in front of you. Because they will put something in front of you, Megan. Probably by end of week. And whatever it is, you cannot sign it." She said one more thing before she hung up. She said, "Check the records for client billing on the Calloway account between March and June. Look at what left the portfolio and where it went. Then call a lawyer." And then she was gone. I sat in that car for another hour. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I had nothing left to cry with. I just sat there while the parking garage filled up and emptied out around me. While people came and went with their laptops and their coffee cups and their days that were still intact. And I turned the shape of what Judas had told me over and over in my hands like something I'd found and didn't yet know how to hold. They had used my name, my login, my credentials, my professional identity. The thing I had built over 6 years of early mornings and weekends, and copy room humiliations and 11 minutes in a bathroom stall. They had taken all of that, and they had used it to write the case against me. They had made me the author of my own removal. They had put my signature on the evidence. And I had walked in that room with my pressed blazer and my prepared talking points, and I had stood at the projector in front of 11 people, and I had not known. I had not known that the question had already been answered, that the document already existed, that Brandon Walsh had already signed. I thought about Greg looking at the table, Greg who had been my direct supervisor for 3 years, Greg who had said to me once, unprompted, in the hallway near the coffee machine, "You're the kind of person this company needs more of, Megan." And I held on to that sentence for longer than I should have admitted. Greg had known since November. He started the car. I drove. I don't remember where I was going. Not home, not back inside, somewhere with motion, somewhere the walls weren't closing. I was on the interstate before he registered being on it, the morning traffic thin enough that I was moving faster than I usually drove. The city falling away on both sides, the sky that particular flat gray that happens before rain. He was thinking about billing records. About what Judith had said, about March through June and where money had gone. I was thinking about the fact that this wasn't just injustice. Injustice I had a framework for. 6 years of injustice, I had a whole internal architecture built for absorbing it. This was different. Credential accessed without consent, documents fabricated under my name. A case built in the dark and then used against me in a lit room where I was the only person who didn't know it existed. That wasn't a power move inside a corporation. That was fraud. I didn't know all the words for it yet. I didn't have a lawyer yet. Didn't have a folder yet. Didn't have anything except a phone number I didn't recognize, and a woman named Judith's voice and the bone. Deep cold certainty that something much larger than a performance review had been happening around me for months while I showed up and built graphs and pressed blazers and believed that the work was enough. The rain started. It came fast, the way autumn rain does, no warning. Full commitment, and I turned on my wipers and I moved to the right lane and I thought, Judith said look at the billing records. Look at what left the portfolio and where it went, and I thought they made me sign something I never wrote. And I thought, call a lawyer by end of week because they will put something in front of you. I was almost calm. That particular terror calm that lives just past the edge of shock. And then a truck came through the median. I don't know why I describe it that way. Came through, like it had a direction, a plan, like it was arriving somewhere. It wasn't. It was losing it, the rear end going sideways on the wet asphalt. The weight of it swinging wide across the lane divider in slow motion that was also somehow instant. And I had maybe 2 seconds to see it before everything stopped being a sequence of things and became just one enormous white moment. I did not think about Brandon Walsh. I did not think about Warren Ashby's hand on the table. I thought about my mother Linda. 12 hours on her feet, smiling through gritted teeth, and how she always said, "You can rest later, baby, rest later." And then I didn't think anything at all, which brings me here, this bed, these monitors, the IV line in the back of my left hand, the fluorescent light above me with one tube slightly dimmer than the other, the window that looks out on the parking lot where the rain is still coming down. Judith's number is still in my call log. And somewhere in the wreckage of my car, or in evidence storage, or in whatever database the hospital used when they admitted me, there is a phone with a 9-minute call on it. And the binning of something I had not yet named. I had not named it yet. But I was starting to understand that what I had overheard from this bed, what I had lain still and breathed shallow to hear, my sister Karen's voice and Daniel's silence, and the particular careful way they were discussing what to do about the insurance policy and the legal documentation and the accounts. That was not grief. That was planning. And the billing records Judith had told me to look for, the money that had left the Callaway portfolio between March and June, he was beginning to think I knew whose names I would find if I looked. Because the fraud at the office and the conversation at my bedside were starting to rhyme in a way that made the room very cold and my heart very loud in my chest. They weren't just stealing from a company. They were stealing from me. And they had been doing it long before the truck came through the median. The first person who came was a nurse named Delphine. Not a lawyer, not a detective. Not anyone I would have written into this story if I were writing it from the outside. Just a woman in her mid-50s with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of hands that have changed 10,000 IV bags without flinching, who came in at 6 in the morning when the shift changed and stood at my bedside for longer than the vitals check required. I was doing what I had been doing since I understood what Karen and Daniel's conversation meant. I was still, eyes closed, breathing slow and measured. The performance of unconsciousness I had stumbled into and then deliberately maintained. Because the alternative was opening my eyes and letting every person in this room know that I had heard everything, and I was not ready for that yet. He was not armed yet. I had nothing, no phone, no documents, no folder, no lawyer's name. No version of events that could survive a direct confrontation. I had only what I knew. And what I knew was enormous and useless without somewhere to put it. Delphine didn't say anything at first. She checked the monitors, adjusted the drip line, wrote something on the chart at the foot of the bed. Routine, professional. The particular efficient quiet of someone who has been doing her job since before E was in high school. And then she stopped. And then she stood very still at the side of my bed, and she said very softly, not quite to me, not quite to the room, "I see you, sweetheart. I've been doing this for 26 years. I know what a sleep looks like. I didn't move. She didn't ask me to. She said, 'You don't have to do anything right now, but when you're ready, you push this call button, and you ask for Delphine. Just Delphine, not the desk. Not the charge nurse, not whoever walks in next. Meh.'" She paused. "There's a woman who called yesterday who left a message at the station. Said her name was Judith. Said she'd been trying your cell and couldn't get through and asked if there was any way to pass along a number." My heart hit the monitor hard enough that I thought for one terrible second the machine would betray me. It beeped. It steadied. Delphine watched it. She said, "I wrote the number down. It's in my pocket." The reason it's in my pocket and not at the desk or in the chart is because the man who came in yesterday afternoon and spoke to the attending, the one with the good shoes and the soft handshake, he asked very particularly whether there had been any outside calls or message for you. And something about the way he asked made me put Judith's number in my pocket instead of the log. She tucked the blanket at the edge of the mattress with the automatic precision of someone who has done it 1,000 times. "Rest," she said. "But no, I'm here." And she walked out. I lay there for a long time after that. There is a particular quality to the silence of a hospital room when you are pretending to be elsewhere. When your entire body is performing absence while your mind is running at full volume. The monitors do not care. The fluorescent light does not care. The rain against the parking lot window outside does not care. They keep their rhythms regardless, indifferent, constant. And under those rhythms you can think, in a way you cannot think when people are watching you think. I thought about Delphine. About the instinct that had made her put a stranger's number in her pocket instead of the log. About 26 years of reading rooms and people, and the particular shape of a lie or a danger or a man, with good shoes asking careful questions. I thought about Judith, who had called my hospital room. Who had tracked me here from a wreck she couldn't have known about when she hung up the phone in that parking garage, which meant she had looked. Which meant she had kept looking, which whatever she had told me about what they had done to her was not something she had moved past. It was something she was still moving through. I thought about the billing records. March through June. The money that had left the Callaway portfolio, and whatever names I would find attached to its destination. I had not been able to get there. The truck had come through the median before he had gotten there, but Judith had told me where to look. And the direction was still intact, even if the person she had told it to was currently lying in an ICU, pretending to be unconscious. And I thought about Karen, who is 3 years older than me and who used to hold my hand during thunderstorms when we were small. Who said once at my college graduation, standing in the parking lot in her good dress, "I have always been prouder of you than you know, Megan." Always, and who I had believed, had let myself believe, because some things you want to be true badly enough that you stop checking them, Karen, whose voice I had heard in this room discussing the policy payout and the legal documentation and the accounts in the careful neutral language of someone who has already done the thinking and arrived at the conclusions. Karen and Daniel, who I had liked. Who I had trusted in the specific passive way you trust people who come into family through love and stay through years. You stop looking at them directly. They're just there. They're just part of it. You don't maintain a FI. I had not maintained a FI on Daniel. I should have maintained a FI on Daniel. I waited until 2 in the afternoon. I know it was 2 because the monitor's timestamp was visible from the angle of my head, and I had been watching it the way you watch a clock when you are waiting for something to stop being too soon. I needed the shift patterns. I needed to understand who was at the desk and who was in the hall, and how long Delphine's rotation ran at 2. The corridor quieted. Visiting hours between 1 and 3 were sparse on a Wednesday. I had worked this out from the sounds, the elevator patterns. The particular cadence of footsteps that means family versus medical versus administrative. At 2 on a Wednesday the floor was most staff. I pressed the call button. She was there in 4 minutes. She pulled the curtain. Not fully. Just enough. And she looked at my open eyes for a moment with an expression that was not surprise exactly, but a kind of quiet completion. Like something she had been holding at a low certainty had resolved, I said, in a voice that came out much rougher than E intended, "Delphine." She said, "There you are." I said, "The number, the one in your pocket." She had it out before I finished the sentence. A folded square of paper with a number written in the clear, deliberate handwriting of someone who takes messes seriously. "I need to use a phone." I said, "Not mine. Mine is, I don't know where mine is. Evidence, maybe, or the car, or I don't know. I need a phone that isn't logged to my room." She looked at me for a long moment, then she said, "I go on break in 10 minutes." I take my break in the supply corridor on the north side, 2nd floor. There's no camera between the stairwell door and the linen closet. My personal cell is a number no one in this building has in any log. She paused. "You're going to need to be able to walk." I looked at the ivy line, at the monitor leads on my chest, at the tube in the back of my left hand. I said, "Tell me what I can disconnect without setting off an alarm." Judith answered on the 2nd ring. She said, "Megan," not a question. She had been waiting. He was standing in a supply corridor on the 2nd floor of a hospital. I didn't know the name of yet. In a gown that tied in the back, with one hand pressed flat against a shelf of folded towels for balance. And my voice when I spoke was steadier than I had any right to expect. I said, "I need a lawyer." She said, "I already have one." "His name is Amos Verity. He's not the kind of lawyer who does employment disputes out of an office park. He's the kind of lawyer who has spent 15 years on financial crime and corporate fraud, and he has been waiting for a case with the shape of yours for approximately that long." A pause. "I sent him the metadata documentation last week. He has already begun preliminary review." I said, "Karen, my sister." "I think she's involved." The silence on the other end was not surprise silence. It was the silence of someone who already knew. She said, "The Callaway billing records, the names on the destination accounts. Megan, I need you to brace yourself," and she told me. I stood in that corridor for a long time after she hung up. Delphine was at the end of the hall, watching me from a distance that was close enough to catch me if I fell, and far enough to give me the privacy of falling. I didn't fall. He breathed. I thought about my mother Linda 12 hours on her feet, smiling through gritted teeth, saying, "You can rest later, baby, rest later." I thought about all the ways I had been resting my suspicion, resting my vigilance, resting the version of Mice that checked things and maintained files, and did not let herself be held in place by wanting something to be true. Was done resting, Amos Verity had the metadata. Judith had the billing trail. Delphine had put a number in her pocket instead of a log, which was the smallest act of protection, and the one that had made everything else possible. The pieces were in position. Every one of them. I had people now. I had documents. I had a lawyer named Amos Verity who had been waiting 15 years for exactly this shape of case. All I had to do was walk back in that room, close my eyes one last time, and let Karen and Daniel come to me. Let them come to me thinking I was still under. Let them say the rest of what they had to say, and then stop pretending. He handed Delphine her phone. He straightened my gown. I put my hand on the wall for balance, and I walked back toward the elevator and the floor I had come from, and the bed with the monitors and the window looking out at the rain. He was ready, but he did not yet know what I would find when I opened that door, because through the small rectangular window in the corridor, he could already see that my room was not empty. Someone was in there who had not been there before, and it was not Karen. I had 1J. That was all I gave myself. 1J of lying in that bed, knowing what I knew, breathing steady for the monitors. Watching the fluorescent tube above me flicker its slightly wrong light, while I let everything Judith had told me. And everything Karen and Daniel had said to each other in careful voices 3 feet from where I lay. Settle into something I could actually hold. 1J to be still. 1J to be the woman in the hospital bed who didn't wake up yet. And then I was going to burn it down. The phone was the first problem, not the call log. I wasn't worried about the call log. What I needed was access, real access, the kind that required 2 hands, a working email address, and enough concentration to navigate a corporate records system while my ribs still clicked when I breathed too deep. The nurse that morning was a young man named Theo, broad-shouldered, unhurried, with the kind of steady hands that made you feel like nothing catastrophic was going to happen on his watch. He came in at 6:40 to check my lines, and I watched him through my lashes the way I'd been watching everything, still, careful, cataloging. He checked the IV. He noted something on his tablet. He was about to leave. I opened my eyes. "Hi," he said. He startled, just slightly. Just enough. Then he smiled. That particular practice warmth that good nurses have warm but calibrated professional relief. "Good morning." He said, "You're back." "I'm back," I said. He asked me the question they always ask. What day was it? Who was I? Did I know where I was? I answered all of them correctly and watched him make notes, and I thought, good. Now I need my phone. I told Theo I needed to make a call. A personal call to my lawyer. He looked at me with that same steady expression and said my personal effects were in the bedside lockbox and that I was welcome to them, but that I should keep the session short, that I needed rest, and had I spoken to the doctor yet this morning? I said, "I'll speak to the doctor in a moment. I just need to make one call first." He left. He was a good nurse. He understood the tone. The phone was at 41% battery, which felt, in that moment, like a specific mercy. Judith's number was exactly where I'd left it. 9 minutes and 12 seconds logged at the top of my recent calls. A number I had not yet saved to contacts because I'd been on an interstate 2 minutes after she hung up. I called a lawyer first. A real one, Ellen Park, who I had worked with once on a contract dispute 3 years ago, and whose card I had kept in my phone because she had struck me as someone who did not panic and did not waste words. It went to voicemail. I left a message that was as brief and specific as I could make it. I used the words unauthorized credential access, fabricated documentation, and potential securities fraud, and I said I needed to speak to her as soon as possible. And I left the hospital room number. Then I opened my email. It took me 4 minutes to get into the corporate system through the external portal. My access credentials still worked. They hadn't locked me out yet, which meant either they hadn't gotten around to it, or they were watching the account and waiting. I decided it didn't matter which. He went to billing records, March through June, and there it was. I had known it was going to be bad. I had known since the moment Judith's voice had said, "Look at what left the portfolio and where it went," that I was not going to find something small and explainable. He had known since he had lain in this bed listening to Karen say, "Well, the policy is structured so that we'd have access within," and then catch herself because Daniel had made some small sound. He had known, but knowing and seeing are different rooms in the same building. And seeing it laid out in clean transaction lines against a white screen with my name in the header of the account, seeing the transfers, the dates. The receiving account numbers I did not recognize, but would, I was certain, recognize by the time Ellen Park returned call. That was a different kind of cold. $93,000 across 4 months. Moved in increments small enough to avoid automatic flagging. Moved with enough internal documentation to look at first glance like standard portfolio rebalancing, moved under my login. I sat with that number for about 15 seconds, then I took 12 screenshots. emailed them too, a personal account they didn't have access to, and put the phone face down on the blanket because my hands were shaking and I needed them to stop. The meeting was called for 2 o'clock. I hadn't called it. I found out later that Brandon had. That he had received word I was awake and had arranged for what the email apparently described as a brief check in to discuss next steps given the circumstances. Very clean language. Given the circumstances, as if the circumstance were something that had simply occurred, weather-wise, like rain. I asked Thea whether I was medically cleared to sit upright in a chair for an extended period. He looked at me with an expression I was becoming familiar with, the expression of a man who understood that the answer I was going to act on and the answer I was asking for were probably not related, and said that I should take it slow, that I'd be more comfortable in the bed, and that if I needed to stop at any point I should stop. I thanked him. I found my blazer. It was in the lockbox under the phone, folded, still carrying the shape of the crash in one shoulder seam. A dark stain on the left cuff that I turned under and pressed flat. I was not going to meet Brandon Walsh in a hospital gown. They came in together, Brandon and Warren Ashby, and a woman I didn't know who had the specific composure of legal counsel, and said nothing. Just sat. Karen was there too. She stood near the window with her arms folded and her face arranged in something that was supposed to look like sisterly concern, and looked, from where I was sitting, like a person who has rehearsed an expression until it no longer quite fits their face. I looked at her for one moment. Just one. She glanced away first. Brandon started speaking before he was fully seated. He said, "Megan, we're so relieved you're okay. We really are. And we want this to be a gentle conversation. We know you've been through something serious, Brandon," I said. "Let's skip to it." He stopped. Warren cleared his throat. He had the same energy he'd had in the conference room. That particular expensive patience. The kind men like him have developed over decades of being the last person to speak before a decision gets made. He said, "We thought it might be appropriate to discuss the documents that were presented at the October review. Given that there may be some confusion about my login credentials," he said. A pause. "About the process," Warren finished. "About my login credentials," I said again, "which were used at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday in November from the administrative server. When my badge records show I left the building at 6:12, another pause. Longer this time. Brandon's expression did something complicated. "I don't think that's. Where are you getting that information? We'd want to make sure you're working from accurate. The metadata," I said. "The document metadata. Would you like me to pull it up? I have it." I did not look at Karen. I could feel her looking at me. Warren Ashby set his hands flat on the blanket's edge. He had moved to the side of the bed. I registered without being invited. The kind of physical assumption that men like him make constantly, and he said very quietly, "Megan, you've been in an accident. You're not well. We came here to support you and to offer you $93,000, I said. Complete silence. The monitor beeped. Once, twice. "Moved in increments," I said. "March through June, under my login. To account that, and I'm going to be honest with you all. I don't know whose name is on that account yet, but my lawyer does, because I forwarded her the records this morning, and she's been very helpful." Brandon Walsh's face went a color I hadn't seen on a person before. Warren said nothing. He had stopped being the last person to speak before a decision got made. He was just a man with his hands flat on a hospital blanket, very still. Doing math, the legal counsel woman, the one who hadn't spoken, wrote something on her notepad and angled it away from me and Karen. Karen finally looked at me. She said, "Megan, I don't know what you think you Karen," I said. I said it the way our mother Linda used to say it. Flat, finished. The voice that meant, "I know exactly where this sentence was going, and we are not going there." "You were going to say, too," I said. "Given the policy is structured so that we'd have access within." And then you were going to finish that sentence. I'm curious what the end of it was. I had a lot of time to wonder about that. The room went very quiet. I looked at each of them. Brandon, who had used my name. Warren, who had signed off on something he thought was clean. Karen, who had stood at my bedside in the dark and made plans out loud because she had believed, fully and completely, that I could not hear her. "I want you all to understand something," I said. I survived the crash. I was awake in this bed for a long time before anyone knew I was awake. And I have a very good memory. I picked up my phone from the blanket. My lawyer will be in touch. The investigation opened in February. I wasn't there for most of it. I was still in physical therapy twice a week. Still relearning the particular mechanics of walking without favoring my left side. Still waking up some nights at 3 a.m. with my heart in my throat and the sound of glass in my ears. The body keeps its own timeline. Separate from justice, separate from resolution. The body doesn't care that you've won something. It just keeps sending you back to the moment of impact. But he heard things. My lawyer. Her name was Patricia Okafor. And she was the kind of woman who spoke in complete sentences at all times and never once raised her voice. Which somehow made her more terrifying than anyone I had ever been in a room with. Patricia kept me informed in the careful, measured way she kept me informed about everything. No drama, just facts delivered in sequence, like stones placed one at a time on a table. The billing transfers were flagged in the 3rd week of February, the documenting irregularities. My login, the administrative server. The 11:43 p.m. timestamp were confirmed in the 1st week of March. Greg resigned on a Thursday. I found out on a Friday. From Patricia, who called me at 8 a.m. and said simply, "He's out." Effective immediately. They didn't give him a press statement. She paused. Brandon submitted a formal cooperation agreement with the Internal Review Board on Wednesday. His name will still be in the record. But he'll be treated as a cooperating party. I sat with that for a moment. I was in my kitchen. In the apartment I had moved back into 3 weeks after leaving the hospital, standing by the window with coffee going cold in my hand. "Okay," I said. "There may be civil exposure," Patricia said. "You have grounds for wrong termination, defamation within the professional context, and potentially tortious interference if we can establish that the documentation was a deliberate effort to suppress your knowledge of the billing transfers before you could act on it." She said all of this the way she said everything, evenly, precisely, like she was reading coordinates. "That's your decision to make. I can fie. Or I can hold. Whatever you want to do." I looked out the window. It was raining again, the way it had been raining that morning in the hospital. The grey February rain that doesn't commit to being anything in particular. "Let me think about it," I said. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I thought about Greg's face in that hospital room, the recalibration, the reassembly. The rapid interior adjustment I had watched him make 100 times and never understood the full cost of until I was on the receiving end of it. I thought about the chair he had gripped, the knuckles. The controlled voice telling me to think carefully about what I was doing, while I lay there with an IV in my hand and a bruised sternum and 11 hours of enforced stillness behind me. I thought about Brandon, who had said she's in a hospital bed and then said nothing else, who had, in the end, cooperated. I didn't know what to do with Brandon. I still don't entirely. There is a particular kind of person who knows something's wrong and doesn't stop it, and then, when the structure begins to fail, steps sideways into cooperation with almost no friction, and I don't know what to call that. Cowardice seems too simple. Survival seems too generous. I thought about Judith Chen Judith, who had called me the morning of the accident. 9 minutes. Long enough to tell me something they had hoped he would never know. I had spoken to her once since leaving the hospital. A brief phone call in which she said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to reach you," and I said, "It didn't. You reached me exactly in time." She had worked at the firm for 11 years before they moved her out. 11 years, and then a manufactured exit, quiet and clean. Because she had started asking questions about the Callaway portfolio that they weren't prepared to answer. They had done it to her first. And then they had done it to me. And the only reason either of us knew was because she had picked up the phone. He called Patricia back on a Thursday evening and told her to fie, not from rage. I want to be precise about that. Because I think precision matters here. I want to be honest about what I actually felt, not what makes a cleaner story. I wasn't burning. I wasn't even particularly cold in the way I had been cold during those 11 hours in the hospital bed. The specific cold calm of someone waiting for the right moment. I was just clear in the way a window is clear after rain. I could see through it without effort. I filed because it was the true thing to do, Because the record needed to say what had actually happened. Because Judith deserved to have it said, and I deserved to have it said. And the 11 people who sat in that room on a Thursday morning and watched me stand at a projector for 20 minutes, not knowing I was already gone. They deserved to know what they had actually witnessed. The settlement came in the fall. I'm not going to tell you the number, because the number isn't the point. And also because Patricia would probably have something to say about it. What I will tell you is that it was enough. Enough to matter. Enough to feel like a true accounting of something, even if no accounting is ever fully true. Greg did not come back to the firm. The last I heard, and I heard this from a mutual contact secondhand. The way you hear things about people you no longer have any direct reason to track. He had taken a consulting position somewhere in another city. Something smaller, something quieter. I don't know what that means for him internally. I don't know if he thinks about that hospital room. I don't know if he thinks about the chair. I don't spend a lot of time wondering about it. This is the thing I've had to learn. And it took me longer than expected. Forgiveness is not the same as warmth. I used to think they were the same. Or that one required the other. That to truly let something go, you had to find your way back to some version of goodwill. But I don't think that's true anymore. I think you can release a thing completely without ever wanting it near you again. I think the line between I forgive you and I don't want you in my life is not a contradiction. It's a boundary, and a boundary isn't cruelty. It's just honest geometry. I don't hate Greg. I don't hate Brandon. I don't spend my evenings reconstructing what I would say if I saw them again. Building arguments in the shower. That's not where my energy lives anymore. My energy lives in my own life. The one I'm building with both hands. Slowly, in the way you build something after a wreck, carefully, attentively, checking the weight, bare walls. I found a new position in the spring, different firm, smaller. A woman named Irene runs it, who has the kind of direct eye contact that tells you immediately she is not performing competence, but actually possess it. The first week, she sat across from me in her office and said, "I've read your FI. All of it, including what happened. I want you to know I hired you because of your work, and I want you to know my door is literally always open. And I want you to know that if anything ever feels like it's going sideways here, I expect you to tell me before it becomes something we can't address together." She said this the way you say something you've actually thought about, not the way you say something for effect. I said, "Thank you, Irene." And I meant it the way you mean something simple. Here's the thing I come back to when I think about all of it. The parking garage. The interstate, the 11 hours, the monitor beeping in the rain-gray light of the ICU, the 2 men in my room who thought they were alone. I survived the crash. That's the plain fact of it. The car hit the median, the glass went, my body took what it took, and I survived. But the other survival, the quieter one, the one that happened in the 11 hours before I opened my eyes, that one I had to choose deliberately. That one I had to hold still for and wait for and locate inside myself before I could use it. The truth doesn't always come in loudly. Sometimes it comes in at 3 a.m. in a hospital room while rain hits a parking lot and machines bleep in the dark. Sometimes it comes in the form of 9 minutes on a phone log. Sometimes it comes in the form of a woman you thought was gone saying, "They did the same thing to me," which means you were never as alone in it as you were made to feel. I don't think I'm unique in this. I think a lot of people have lain still in a room somewhere, maybe not a hospital bed. Maybe just the particular stillness of a life going wrong around them, and heard something they were never supposed to hear, and had to decide, quietly, privately, what to do with the knowing, my name is Megan. It was in an accident, I chose what to do next. And if you've ever had to do the same, if you've ever been in the still room, heard the thing, felt the lock turn over, then you already know that the hardest part isn't surviving the crash. The hardest part is deciding afterward what kind of person to become because of it. I decided to become honest. I decided to become boundaried. I decided to carry what was mine and set down what was theirs. It turns out that's enough. It turns out that's everything.